questions. It's really good to see you all here. My name's Sylvia and I'm part of the Christian Union who are putting on this event and have been putting on events all this week. This is our last lunch bar of the week, so it's quite exciting. So we're going to have a short talk on the topic today of why did Jesus have to die? And then we're going to have, so that's going to be from Richard, and then we're going to have a question and answer session. So maybe you've come along with questions, maybe you've had questions all through the week, and this is your moment to ask, really. So please do be texting into the number, it's like hanging above my head, and we will put them to Richard at the end. So yeah, why did Jesus have to die? I'd like to welcome Richard up.
Good. I'm going to, you'll be delighted to know, give a slightly shorter talk to allow more time for questions, since this is the end of the week, and it might be there are questions not just from what I've said today, but perhaps as you've been considering the whole picture of the claims of Jesus, you've got other questions, so we're going to allow a bit more time. So here's the title of today's talk, Sacrifice of Love or Brutal Murder. Now, what kind of a loving sacrifice could the death of Jesus possibly be? How can his death in any way be linked with his love for us? If you went home this weekend and you walked into the family kitchen and said, Mum, I really haven't told you how much I love you, and I just want to demonstrate once and for all. And you pull a revolver out of your bag and shoot yourself dead. Do you think your mother will be comforted by your dying words? I love you and I'm going to show you how much I love you. Will she proudly tie that revolver around her neck and say, yes, this is a lovely symbol of my daughter's, my son's love for me? Oh, it's a macabre picture. Of course not. Any more than if tomorrow when I'm home, I take my wife Ruth for a lovely romantic walk. There's a mill pond not far from where we live, and we walk around the mill pond. And I say, darling, I really love you so much, watch. And I throw myself into the icy cold February water and disappear beneath a pool of bubbles. Will she see that as a demonstration of my love for her? She'll see it as a demonstration of my fragile mental state, won't she? She won't see how the loving and the dying are connected. It just seems gratuitous. Other people say, well, yeah, I know why Jesus died on the cross. Surely it was to start a religion. And people will sometimes say that the origins of all religion are pretty much the same. That some person of great moral or spiritual or intellectual standing, they gain a new insight. And they sort of teach this new body of knowledge, and they make sure that they build a culture around it, get a massive following that guarantees the future of their movement. And, you know, for Judaism, for Buddhism, for Islam, there is some merit in that analysis. For the founders of those religions, Moses, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and of course Muhammad, they died at a ripe old age. They had a lifetime of teaching, a big following, and the future of their respective movements pretty much guaranteed. But you can't say the same about Jesus and Christianity, can you? Jesus died around the age of 33 after maximum 3 years of public ministry. And then he found himself an outcast by society. He was betrayed by one of his closest supporters, denied by another, and then pretty much deserted by all of them, apart from his mum and a couple of her friends. And then he dies prematurely, tragically, a lonely figure on a cross. And yet more billions followed Jesus than anybody else on the planet. But why did he die? That isn't, by the way, how you would, with foresight, start a religion. You might say, well, perhaps he didn't see it coming. One of the things I'd love you to do is to take away this account of Jesus' life. It's called John's Gospel. Uncover, see for yourself the evidence from this eyewitness account. And one of the things you'll see through this is Jesus spending a lot of time showing people who he is. That he's got power over demons, power over sickness, power over the elements of nature. And yet he keeps saying that he's got this appointment. There's a moment in time he's going towards. And it is actually the cross. So why is it that the Old Testament part of the Bible just spends most of its time looking forward to Jesus dying on the cross? And you read other parts of the New Testament, they are reflections essentially on the death of Jesus on the cross. Why is the most significant person in world history deliberately moving events towards his own death? He knew what was coming. He saw the treachery of Judas long before he finally betrayed him. If you read John chapter 19, where Jesus is before the Roman governor Pilate, it's an eerie account. You think Pilate's in charge? You read that. It will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. I read that passage a couple of weeks ago with a friend of mine. We were using this Uncovered Gospel, looking at the discussion questions. And he said to me, he said, Jesus was calling all the shots there, wasn't he? Yeah, he was. Moving towards the cross was the fulfillment of his whole life. But what a terrible thing to do. I mean, we get a little bit blasé about Jesus dying on the cross. It seems kind of, well, that's kind of what Jesus does, isn't it? He dies. And Christians say it's wonderful, and they write songs about it and rejoice in it and wear little crosses. But in the day, it was just repugnant. It was a massive intellectual stumbling block to Greeks, thinking of some person of insight dying, because the Greek gods tell us that if you're smart enough, you come in, you do a bit of the action, then you get out of there before it all blows up. For the Jews, for the Hebrew mind, it was a great stumbling block, the idea that somebody should die so horribly, cursed by God. You see, to be tortured, to be betrayed, to be beaten up, to be stripped naked, nailed to a cross, lifted up, dropped down into the socket, so you're just in agony as your bones go out of joint and you suffocate in blood and spittle, and you're not. You're dying like a common thief. You're dying cursed by God. You are an utter outcast. And that's, of course, why everybody deserted Jesus. As Jesus hung on the cross, just before he gave up his spirit, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You might say, was that because he really didn't know what was going on? Was that because this wasn't really his hour? He was having massive doubts. Actually, what Jesus was doing there is he was quoting the first line of an ancient Hebrew psalm. You don't have the full Bible with you, you've just got the Gospel of John. But I'm just going to turn to that, because nobody actually knew what this psalm was about. But here we have, nearly 1,000 years before the Romans had perfected crucifixion, we have an incredible description of the suffering of Jesus, many hundreds of years before crucifixion had even been invented. And Jesus quotes the first line of this psalm to draw the disciples' attention to it. And subsequently it became important. This is what 1,000 years before Jesus the psalmist says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? I am a worm, not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me, they hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in God, they say, let God rescue him. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. Dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. It's an astonishing description of the death Jesus died hundreds and hundreds of years before crucifixion had ever been devised. When the cross is dropped into its socket, the bones go out of joint. That's what the psalmist is saying. My bones have gone out of joint. Cruel men pierce my hands and my feet. So Jesus is very much in control. He's in agony, but he's saying this is what everything has always been pointing towards. So what kind of a plan involves such a violent death? Well, John says in chapter 3 and verse 16, on page 16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish but have everlasting life." And in the 2 verses before that, he said, just as Moses, and I haven't got time to go into the story, but you can ask questions if you want, just as Moses in the Old Testament lifted up the bronze serpent, so that if people had faith, they would look at this and be healed from, well, in fact, they've been, sorry, it's an involved story, I didn't mean to go into all this, but anyway, they got healed. Okay, just as Moses lifted up a bronze serpent, so must the Son of Man, Jesus, be lifted up. And again, he's talking about his cross. Why? Because God so loved that he gave. Now, it's not easy, is it, to see how the dying and the loving are connected. The disciples didn't at all. They fled. They thought, this is awful, this is all over. But within weeks, they were rejoicing in the crucifixion. And the early church, they decorated buildings with crosses, ultimately building massive cathedrals. And crosses are everywhere. In fact, the Apostle Paul says, we preach Christ and him crucified. That's a bit weird, isn't it? You don't hear Marxists saying, we preach Trotsky and him ice-picked. I mean, it's not a great way to die. And neither do Muslims say, we preach Muhammad and him dying of dysentery. Now, I'm not mocking Marxists or Muslims, because they don't say that. I'm actually showing the sort of mockery that Christians endured. We preach Christ and him crucified. The Christians were persecuted and mocked for cannibalism, for celebrating communion, because they remembered Jesus' death, the breaking of bread, the drinking of wine. It was utter mockery. One of the earliest pieces of graffiti to show this is on the Palatine Hill in Rome. I had the pleasure of going to Rome with Ruth for a few days last summer. And archaeologists have found this graffiti, which is in on the wall of a training college for imperial pages, cooks, if you like, back in the 3rd and 4th century. And in crude caricature, on one side of the wall is a picture of, it's a crude caricature of Jesus, a picture of a man on a cross with a donkey's head instead of a human head. And then on the other side of the wall, there's a young lad, obviously a student at the college, who is saluting Jesus on the cross. And underneath, the caption simply says this: Alexamenos worships his God. And it was just mockery, you know, it was the God Squad getting mocked at college, as they always have done. You see, the death of Jesus has always been a source of ridicule for the enemies. And yet the Christians revelled in it. It was a source of great victory. But what kind of victory can you have by dying on a cross? The Battle of Waterloo, Wellington's forces received this message. Wellington, Duke of Wellington, defeated. Now that's an appalling message to get, isn't it? I mean, we're not used, the Brits, to being defeated by the French. And so the English forces began to pack up, ready to come back to Britain. And then somebody said, we haven't got the full message. We haven't read the whole message. So the whole message was read. Wellington defeated Napoleon. So when the disciples saw Jesus arrested, brutalized, hung on a cross, dying so horribly in such agony, they read Jesus defeated. But a few days later, after the resurrection, they read the full message. Jesus defeated death. Jesus defeated sin. Jesus defeated hell. Jesus defeats all the biggest enemies we can ever face. The sense of fear and guilt that come from just being sinful people. The thought of what lies beyond death. The thought of facing God unforgiven. So that is the victory of the cross, that simply when Jesus went to the cross, he went there to defeat our greatest enemies of sin and death and guilt. You see, the Bible is very clear that sin is so serious it has to be punished. It can't just be overlooked. God spent hundreds and hundreds of years with the children of Israel saying, look, if you do something wrong, bring a lamb. Bring an unblemished lamb with no fault in it, no blemish. Must be a male, must be firstborn. Don't break any of its bones, but sacrifice it. Its blood needs to be shed. It needs to die a violent death by being killed, by being slaughtered. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Israelites realized that was how they got forgiveness. But it wasn't about lambs. It was never about lambs. Then, again, you can see in chapter 1 of this uncovered gospel, the bottom of page 6, a guy called John the Baptist sees Jesus and says, behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. So every Jewish mind is thinking, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. And sure enough, Jesus was a sacrificial lamb. And the Roman soldier, when he went to hasten the death of those still on crosses, there were two people, one either side of Jesus, he noticed those two thieves were still alive, so he broke their legs. So they couldn't push themselves up to breathe. That's how you stayed alive on a cross. You had to push and pull on the nails in order to breathe rather than to drown in your own blood and spittle. That's why it's so agonizing. The Roman soldier thought Jesus looked dead, so he shoved a spear into his heart. Blood and water going, yeah, he's dead. I won't break his bones, won't break his legs. See, Jesus was that sacrificial lamb, down to the last detail. Innocent, pure, sinless, male, firstborn, no bone broken. Now, you say, but that all sounds very, very bloodthirsty. Why did Jesus have to go to the cross? Well, simply because if he doesn't pay for the consequences of our sin, then we have to. And that would mean separation from God for all eternity. God so loved that he gave. Do you see the link yet? I mean, if you were to go home this weekend and say, oh, hi man, how are things going? And this is all totally improbable, but then an armed intruder runs into the house and is about, for whatever reason, to shoot your mother. And you stand between your mother and the armed intruder and you take the bullet. Well, then your mother sees how you're dying, which happens, and you're loving and connected. Or, and you've guessed it, we're walking around the mill pond, Ruth and Ruth slips in, and I jump in and rescue her and somehow die in the attempt. Yeah, Ruth has an easier time connecting my death and my love together. Well, John is saying really clearly that Jesus took our bullet. Jesus plumbed the icy depths of death in order that we wouldn't have to, in order that we could be forgiven. Sin is so serious that Jesus had to die. He wasn't an innocent bystander. God the Father, God the Son were so close in this that it's effectively God taking the punishment. This is his only Son. An illustration I used last night to show that it's God taking the punishment would be to imagine God is like a wife who's being betrayed effectively by her husband. Her husband's been unfaithful to her. How is it ever possible to reconcile those two together? You know, it just seems like the whole relationship is over. And that's very much like us with God. We're betrayed God. We live in his world. We've ignored him. We've chased other things other than him. How can a relationship ever be restored? So let's imagine the woman and the man. The man has been unfaithful. But there is a twist. One day the man turns up to the family home, knocks on the door and says, I'm really sorry. I've been unfaithful. I've messed up. Will you have me back? Now what does she do? Now the interesting thing is she does still love her husband, even though he's caused her great humiliation, great hurt. What does she do? What's her response? She could say, oh yeah, sure, hardly knew you were gone. That'd be a strange response. It would suggest the relationship wasn't worth kind of saving. There was none there in the first place. Or she could say, get out of my house, I never want to see you again. That would be understandable, wouldn't it? But that wouldn't be a healing of the relationship. That would be an amputation, that would be a cutting off, go away. God could have said that to the world, could have said, right, I never want to see you again. And if I'm the source of love, beauty, goodness, that is the last you'll ever see of that. But the woman in the story still loves her husband. So when he says, will you forgive me, will you have me back? She wants to respond. She does still love him. So imagine she says, yes, I will. What do you think of that? Does it seem just a bit cheap? It's a bit neat? He goes and sins. She forgives him. Where's the price? Well, the price is quite simply the hurt that woman absorbs into herself. You see, true love has the capacity not just to react against hurt and betrayal, but somehow to come to terms with it, to absorb it. And Jesus, when he died on a cross, he came to terms with the suffering, the evil we'd introduced into his world, our rebellion. And he plumbed the depths of his own divine self and absorbed that hurt, absorbed our sin, took God's wrath and indignation and settled it once and for all. That's the agony of the cross. That Jesus bore the punishment your sin and my sin deserve. For God so loved that he gave. And what he's offering today, through this events week, and what many students have already found this week, is that the slate can be wiped clean. We can be forgiven. We can know meaning, purpose, peace of mind, a restored relationship with God. And one of the things I would really encourage you to do is perhaps do one of the studies in this Uncovered Gospel. If you turn to page 150, you'll see that there's a study based on this account of the crucifixion in chapter 19. Now, why not say to one of the guys you know in the Christian Union, if you do, hey, why not over a drink? Why don't we have a discussion about the death of Jesus? Maybe go into it a little bit more. So there we have it. The reason Jesus died was love. How are the loving and the dying connected? Well, simply because this is the only means by which we can be forgiven, restored into a relationship with God. But it actually has to be responded to. It's not an intellectual, oh yeah, that's interesting, thank you Richard for explaining that. We need to actually ask for that forgiveness and turn from being independent of God and actually confess the wrong we've done. Say, will you have me back? I'm really sorry that I've effectively betrayed you, I've cheated on you, I've ignored you all my life. Well, he's willing to have you back. Now, I think Sylvia's going to come and tell us how we're going to ask our questions. And I'm very happy to have a mixture of texted questions, questions from the floor, comments. It is the last one, so maybe we can mix it up a bit.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to give you a minute to text in some more questions. We've got some really good ones, so I'm looking forward to them.